What up, y'all? It is Anti-Negative here, back with another episode 10 of the Magic the Blabbering podcast. And this week we had a pretty eventful weekend with the SCG Baltimore happening and all that jazz. And it was kind of a just another, insurance. In my opinion, good insurance on the bans coming up on November 10th. Although the tournament was won by Rakdos Leyline, which was really just mono red Leyline, just another mono red deck winning again. We had a big turnout of VV as well. Day one, it was 31.4% of the meta. It had a conversion rate of way higher than that, since on day two we had 51.9% of the day two meta being Izzet Cauldron as well. We didn't really have as much turnover on the mono red aggro, since both Izzet in general has been running torches back in the main. They're not allowed to be as greedy as they used to be. So now they can kind of deal with a little bit more than they were previously dealing with. Although the Leyline player who won the tournament was just running extremely hot and pretty much just couldn't be beat. They were just probably playing the most high roll games of their life, in my opinion. Certainly, like, I played against Leyline. I don't really play that deck much. I haven't played it much either. In my opinion, that deck really needs you to high roll in order to get those types of wins. When the bans happened with Heartfire Hero going and Monstrous Rage, it also was hurt a lot by that banning, and a lot of people said that that deck was dead. But of course, there's still a community that's like super supportive of the Leyline builds, and it's very, very I don't want to call it gambling, but yeah, very casino, very slot machine like style deck. Because you hit your creature, you hit Leyline, and one pump spell can kind of make them dead by turn 3, which ended up happening on game 2. And on game 1, he also had 2 Leylines in play, and then game 2 pretty much didn't have to mulligan, hit another Leyline. So just extremely high roll, and congrats to that guy. But that's just how that tournament turned out. We're really just kind of looking again at the turnout of Izzet Cauldron, once again dominating the meta. When a deck warps the entire meta around it, everybody has to tech for it. And so you got a lot of people kind of going back onto Jeskai control, a lot of people on Orzhori's control, people still on Dimir mid-range, even though it has kind of a bad matchup into that. And pretty much none of them converted into day 2, making it so it was pretty much the same turnout again, where everything, has to pivot towards the Izzet VV matchup, therefore leaving mono red to just kind of run rampant. So mono red aggro still had the highest conversion rate, although they did not win this tournament. A mono red Leyline aggro deck instead of one. So the non-typical mono red aggro won. If you see this deck on the ladder, it's probably not going to be very common, since it is so volatile. So a lot of people don't really like playing this deck right now because of that in specific, And I would imagine that this deck is probably going to, fall off a little bit more once the bannings come through. But that leads us into our big topic of the day, because we just wanted to, kind of touch base on that, see where everything's at. A lot of people were still saying, oh, VV's not going to get banned now that, some other deck has won. It's pretty much 100% going to happen. I would say about 99.98% going to happen, since we still have the same numbers pushing everything out and warping the meta around Izzet Cauldron. Same way just Izzet in general. Just doing the same thing it's been doing since Corey still. So I would imagine that there's nothing going to be changed with that. But what we are going to talk about today is what else is bannable in the meta. And there are probably a few other things. I just wanted to kind of shine a light on possible other bans here because we had a lot of conversations over the week with a bunch of people kind of speculating on certain bannable cards. You know, obviously people think that standard is completely broken. So I just kind of wanted to shine some light on some cards that could also possibly go, that kind of are going to pick up the slack where VV leaves off. Obviously, Dimir midrange is one of the culprits of, like, you know, back in July when everything was banned out, Dimir midrange was not touched and was the meta for a full month until rotation. And that did not feel good. It did not look good because immediately it was like 50% of the meta. And that's coming from like Untapped analytics and from MTG Goldfish as well. So pretty much anything that was monitoring the meta of MTGA saw that, and MTGO was seeing the amount of Dimir midrange kind of rise up. So that's definitely a candidate. We might see something from Dimir midrange go. But on top of VV going, I believe that Izzet probably has another problem card inside of it, and that is PROFT'S Eidetic Memory. This card, a lot of people have been experimenting with playing VV without VV, which would open up about 8 to 9 slots, you know, because then people wouldn't have to run the exhaust creatures as well on the sideboard to give the VV deck a little bit more, you know, power to it. I don't even think they're even running that card anymore. I think Quantum Riddler has kind of like filled that slot, but that's where Riddler is kind of like filling in this area here, because Riddler also draws cards. Everything in the deck draws a card. So because of this, you know, you have the situation where now everybody pretty much is worried about, you know, okay, well, does PROFT'S just take over the meta? And I don't know, you know, I definitely have built a fair amount of PROFT decks, and I really enjoy playing PROFT'S because it, you know, again, feeds into what Izzet does super well. And we're getting some more avatar cards that are kind of also playing into that too. It doesn't seem like Avatar is gonna, you know, power down Izzet at all. There's a possibility that Avatar has its own archetypes within it. I'm not talking about allies or anything like that. So far, I'm not really huge on those, but in terms of like the card draw spells in general, you got like 2-mana Sokka, you know, the seal that was also spoiled. Those cards seem like they fit into a prof shell pretty easily and pretty quickly. So, you know, is PROFT'S bannable? Maybe. I would say in comparison to other cards that I would put on the list of possibly going alongside VV, I would put PROFT'S Eidetic Memory like way up there in the list. Izzet doesn't have the, you know, it isn't just hard locked to playing PROFT'S. Like, once Izzet goes, you know, with VV and PROFT'S, you can definitely still play like the Prowess Shell with Storm Chaser's talent and a bunch of other cards. And Prowess is not going away either. And you're getting a bunch of firebending stuff, which is also going to feed into the Prowess kind of shells as well. So there's a lot of stuff to try out, a lot of stuff to build. I feel like in the spirit of giving Izzet a kind of a new life and making the builds not feel so mono-focused around maybe even PROFT'S as well, I would say that PROFT'S is worthy of going. You know, saying just, you know, from a design standpoint, it's a rare, so it already is speaking for itself as being like, you know, possibly 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio it should be doing. But so it draws a card on its way in, puts a counter on something, and then it's just constantly giving you value for the rest of the game. It's not like Beans where it's giving you more cards. We're talking about up the beanstalk, but it is always giving you more value for the rest of the game. So if you're playing Quantum Riddler, you know, obviously that's going to be really, really good with profs because, you know, say if you're playing Hellbent, Riddler's just drawing you 2 cards every turn, then yeah, profs is going to trigger every turn and going to make your Riddler gigantic. And that's a huge late game prospect. So I would say that profs is definitely like the gift that keeps giving. It makes it strong early game, makes it strong late game. There's pretty much no point in the game where profs is bad. And it's never a bad idea to play profs on curve either because it replaces itself. So if you have kind of a bad draw, even just playing profs can get you out of that bad situation. So I would say just for those aspects, because it's so exponential, it's hard to even monitor how much 4-1 that profs is even, you know, making your game. Yeah, I would say that there's a high potential for profs eidetic memory to just be banned. And there's a lot of things I want to talk about today, but I wanted to make sure that I get in profs in there because profs definitely higher on the tilt scale for, you know, people just generally thinking that this card is going to go. You know, and there's a bunch of other cards that kind of fit that bracket as well. So Proft, probably number 1 on my also going to get banned list. And that's, you know, kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So next up on the scale, we have mono red. I personally don't think that things are really that out of hand with mono red. Although if you look at things like Screaming Nemesis, you could probably rationalize that it's doing a lot for a 3-mana 3/3 with haste. Being able to, you know, relay burn spells and turn them into damage into the face or into other things. It's very tilting. It's hard to play around. You know, you definitely are more incentivized to kill Screaming Nemesis at, well, either when they're tapped out or on your turn when they're tapped out. So, you know, it makes it really hard to play around that card because you kind of want them to never trigger the emblem that comes off. So when you look at that card again, you know, thinking rares 2 for 1, you know, and nowadays rares aren't even 2 for 1. They're more like 3 for 1, 2.5 for 1, you know, because uncommons kind of fill that 2 for 1 kind of bracket nowadays. If you look at like what things like, you know, the vampire spells, they really kind of made it really obvious that everything that was uncommon was, you know, either going to do 1 damage or is going to give you some other game piece as well. And so, yeah, uncommons kind of fill that 2 for 1 now. And then pretty much everything that's 3 for 1 and up, it's going to be a rare mythic. So the level of scaling kind of goes exponential with mythics. So the fact that you can just put an emblem that's completely uncounterable and uninteractable, that makes Nemesis way more scary of a card. It's hard to deal with in Commander. It's hard to deal with in Constructed as well. And it's kind of ubiquitously played right now in Standard and in Pioneer when you have a red deck with any like aggro curve. It's probably correct to put Nemesis in there just because it's such a good, you know, curve topper at 3, which is, you know, where aggro kind of wants to keep their curve topped at. You know, Bone Crusher Giant goes right alongside Nemesis and it does not do anything worse. So a lot of decks have incidental life gain right now in order to keep themselves alive, and they're not doing it with Shieldred. There's some life gain decks that are probably just pretty much kept out of best of 3 because of the fact that Nemesis is so commonly played. So it's probably a fair assessment to say that Nemesis is possibly bannable. But again, like mono red aggro has taken a lot of hits already from the bannings, and a lot of its like power has been gutted out of it. So unless they plan on like really giving back like a ton of power again to mono red aggro, which they've already been filling it up with, which is my point, there's a possibility that this won't be touched. I would put this a little bit lower on that level. But it's definitely tilting, definitely very strong, and there's kind of it's really hard to argue that this card isn't like one of the more egregious power creeps in the format, because 3-mana 3/3 is one thing, but it giving an emblem with almost no hoops to jump through. Like if we look at Sephiroth, which is the black, you know, kind of version and part of this cycle, which is like things that give you an emblem of that color's kind of like identity. this has almost no hoops to jump through. So like mono black getting that Sephiroth thing, you need like 4 things to die, and you know, they need to actually die. They can't have a rest in peace in play. So Sephiroth is definitely easier to counter. But still Sephiroth is very good, you know, whole archetype built around it. It is, you know, Giga Blood Artist, but you know, Screaming Nemesis has almost no hoops to jump through. You know, it's doing the same thing like Stuffy Doll and Brash Taunter are doing at a much lower rate, which with much more power and a much more effective keyword in red. So like the scale at which this card is pushed is hard to even rationalize. So, you know, Screaming Nemesis definitely up on the chopping block. I would say possibly banned, maybe not. Again, because aggro has taken up some major hits, and it's hard to say that when people aren't ready for aggro and they're, you know, you don't have to worry about Is It Cauldron anymore, that aggro won't just fall off a cliff, because, you know, it's not really setting up those crazy wins on turn 3 or even turn 4 right now. I would say the aggro deck possibly is a turn 5 deck. But you have, you know, the Nova Hellkite and other cards like that to kind of keep it a little bit more powerful. But yeah, it's really hard to say. It definitely invalidates blocking. It definitely invalidates life gain. So for those reasons, I would say it could be out. All right, next up on the list, we have Dimir Midrange. And this is probably a more fair version of like power creep in comparison. But you know, that's not to say that it's not still tilting as hell to see a KAITO come down. And KAITO does the thing that everybody hates about ninjutsu, is that it makes you have to worry about a 1/1 flyer or a 2 mana with flash. You know, anything that has evasion in general, it makes it more of a threat than it really is, because of the fact that, you know, you're going to ninjutsu something in and you can't really block this thing effectively. So then you end up having to like waste your removal on a 1 mana common, like Siren and other cards like that. Even like Cecil, you're kind of incentivized to kill earlier because, you know, I let Cecil live for a little bit longer because I want them to hit their own face a bunch. And it's pretty much free damage for me. That's kind of how I treat Cecil, but I will remove it before it flips. That's kind of like your ideal situation with Cecil. But by then you could have a KAITO down, you know, because you're really not trying to block Cecil. It is a 2/3 with Death Touch. That thing swings up, and it's really hard to trade with. So, you know, good luck killing the Cecil with a blocker. But yeah, so. Yeah, KAITO's definitely up there in the list. And again, another mythic. So a lot of these cards, mythics and rares, you know, Proft is a rare, but KAITO comes down. It gets you another ETB, so you can play your Flood Pits Drowner, tap something down, you know, ninjutsu in the KAITO, maybe tap another thing down, and the next turn tap another thing down with the Drowner again. So you're just moving everything out of the way. Everything's stunned. And then if you don't have anything to tap down, you don't have nothing to worry about. You're just making like something with hexproof come in an uncounterable type of fashion. So you have to play like Tishana's Tidebinder or something else that can counter an activated ability, because ninjutsu is an activated. So it's really hard to deal with it. Really hard to keep it from coming down. Although if you do Tishana, it is like a very tempo negative for them. So blue-white control tends to run a lot of Tishanas. I've been playing Dimir a bunch here and there. So, you know, that has happened to me against blue-white control. Although KAITO is literally the best thing to play against them, because blue-white control classically doesn't have a lot of interaction for a 1 mana 1/1 with flying, other than just trying to use their get lost to kill the KAITO. So, you know, if you're thinking like, okay, well, how do I deal with the threats of KAITO and Nemesis? Well, Bitter Triumph in black can deal with both. Get Lost in white can deal with both. Scorching Dragonfire And red can deal with both, although with Nemesis, now you're putting damage on it, which is another problem. Red has a very hard time dealing with the Nemesis, and so does green. Although, you know, hard-hitting Question can deal with a KAITO in green, and then so does Trample. So, you know, there's a lot of things that you can get in and kill KAITOs with in green, but it's a little bit harder. So, yeah, it poses a really, really, like, awkward threat. It can literally buy an entire turn, almost pretty much like fogging. This has always been the case with like planeswalkers in general. This is why a lot of people didn't like them, and why they started to like kind of phase out planeswalkers, because, you know, had the opposite effect that battles did, where, and they've always had this effect where it just gives your opponent another life total, essentially fogging your opponent, because now they have to direct all their damage at this planeswalker, because you could have removal up, there can be a blocker in play, you know, just name your reason why it's hard to kill this planeswalker. It could have made a blocker for it. So, you know, if the planeswalker is protecting itself, it becomes very tilting to deal with. So KAITO does pretty much all that while being like a Gideon on their turn and replacing itself and surveilling too. And then also it gives a Dimir emblem for ninjas. So now their Sanctuary becomes a 5/5, and, you know, they can pretty much, you know, end the game with KAITO by itself. So that's why it's like one of the perfect things to play against control deck, because it can kind of regulate control by itself. But that's kind of why we want it. So, you know, that's the other argument for KAITO, is that you want things like this so control can't just run away with the meta, because control is getting a lot of tools to work with nowadays. It has been progressively every set getting something, and, you know, now it just can look through its entire deck with stock up and consult the star charts, you know. So there's a lot of things that are helping control out right now. Jeskai control is back on the up, Azorius control is back on the up, and when Vivi goes away, those two decks become better. So we'll have to worry about those decks taking over the meta if Dimir midrange isn't around to shut those decks down. So, you know, it is a give and take there. KAITO is definitely very tilting to play against, and that's kind of the, like, when you think about all the other cards that are bannable from the meta right now, you know, Doomwake put it pretty well in his explanation about what's wrong with Standard, is like, we have pre-modern level power, everything is like turn 4 killing you, everything is a, you know, maximum level threat, everything is giga pushed. So we have to deal with all these new threats constantly. Every single card that makes it into a constructed deck is this rare, you know, 3-for-1 that's doing way more than it should. And KAITO is no exception to that. So, you know, when we look at KAITO and we look at Enduring Curiosity, those two are definitely problematic cards for the meta. And I personally don't think that they're that bannable, but for the sake of, you know, diversity in the meta, and for people to be less tilted and maybe come back to Standard, I feel like a lot of people are dropping off right now, especially with the super low turnout at Baltimore, which is, you know, a result of many other things. It's not just people hating on VV. You know, it's one of the last RCs before, you know, the PTs really kind of start up here and we get to Worlds. So that definitely over everything. If it wasn't just a free ride for people to go and play at Baltimore, probably would have saw like almost no turnout for that. But everybody knows that, like, if you go and play in the Baltimore RC, you probably were making some money either way, if it was affordable for you to get there, of course. But, you know, so like, KAITO definitely bannable because of all those reasons. You know, it's more than a 3-for-1. It could be like exponential for 1, similar to a Proft situation where it replaces itself. It's very evasive. It has hexproof. You know, it needs specific sorcery speed removal unless you have nowhere to run. So it needs very specific teching in order to kill it. It's really hard to kill it outside of black and white. If you don't have a board to kind of swing through and kill it. And in that case, it's fogging you. So there's like so many different reasons why KAITO is really hard to deal with in tilting. So I hear you when you say you hate KAITO and you think it needs to be banned. On the same token, you know, KAITO doesn't do very well against aggro decks. So it can be like the thing that you're taking out for more answers to aggro, specifically like OUROBOROID decks and other things like that. There's not just mono red aggro in the meta right now. There's Boros aggro, there's Simic aggro. Well, there's aggro that has OUROBOROID, and then there's aggro that has NEMESIS. So those two decks kind of don't want to play, or kind of want you to play KAITO against them because it's so tempo negative. But anyways, so, you know, got to worry about KAITO removing your blockers. That's kind of like the whole thing about that. If you don't care about KAITO doing that, then KAITO becomes a huge problem for them. So mid-range and control, KAITO keeps those decks in kind of like in check. And then the other card in Dimir mid-range is Enduring Curiosity. And so now this card, you know, is, you know, arguably less tilting to look at than KAITO because it doesn't have hexproof. But the glimmer aspect of it, which is the whole, like, its special ability of it dying and coming back to the battlefield as an enchantment, that becomes really, really hard to deal with as well. And so now you're kind of asking your opponent to either just kind of not care about all the cards they're about to draw, or have specific can exile this card if need be. Like you're playing Exercise, which is from that set. I believe Scorching Dragonfire is also from Duskmourn as well. I'm pretty sure I see, you know, KAITO on the art of Scorching Dragonfire. I'm pretty sure that was reintroduced then. So yeah, it's asking for specific exile removal. Obviously, the End is pretty good against both things. So if you can play the End right now and you're in black, it is a good card against a lot of things. Ketramose is probably playable again after Izzet leaves kind of in shambles. So, you know, the End definitely more of a tempo swing against them, because if you remove all their KAITOs or all their Enduring Curiosities, you kind of gut their deck pretty hard. So yeah, I would say Curiosity is definitely up on that level of possibly being banned. You know, it's a 4-mana card, so it is definitely hard to rationalize that this is like super, you know, unreasonable. It's a 4-mana with flash though, so we do have to give it that. And then the clause of just any creature hitting your opponent with combat damage, giving you a card, that's where the card becomes a little bit more unreasonable, because it draws just so many cards, has flash speed as well, so you can wait till the very last moment before combat damage happens to just put Curiosity onto the field and then refill your hand, draw 3 cards. And that's where Dimir just kind of takes over the game. Not because they're killing you on turn 4, but on turn 4, they have an insurmountable amount of cards over you while answering everything that you're doing, which really just puts its tempo gameplay online. So if you really like think that anything else is bannable in Dimir, I don't think you can rationalize literally anything else other than Enduring Curiosity or KAITO. And Curiosity is probably the less offensive of the two, but it's still pretty offensive. So, you know, again, for the sake of making Standard fun and giving it a new life, possible that one of these 2 cards from Dimir needs to go. We don't have Cut Down. We don't have super efficient removal, although we are getting Heartless Act with Avatar. So it is worth taking a hard look at Dimir and saying that maybe one of these 2 cards needs to go, not just because it's strong, but because it kind of gatekeeps some decks out of the meta, and then gatekeeps some players, because some players are so fed up with playing against Dimir mid-range at this point that it's, you know, just like Nemesis. These 2 cards, you know, Nemesis and KAITO, they really, really make it hard for people to have fun. And so for the sake of fun, you know, it's similar to like Bankbuster getting banned. So it's not exactly the same, because, you know, Bankbuster was played in every single deck and invalidated things of certain toughness or power in order to crew bank busters. So you really needed anything that could crew bank buster to validate them being played in your deck. And then, you know, bank buster just slowing down the meta so much. But yeah, these are the cards that are bank buster for their colors. You know, so if you're in red, you want to play an aggro plan at all, you have to play Nemesis. And Nemesis invalidating life gain decks in best of 3 for the most part. It really kind of hurts the meta as well, because that's, you know, 2 full decks that probably would see a lot of play in our more budget, you know, entry level kind of new player decks as well. A lot of new players love playing life gain decks, and I think they would see a lot more play if Nemesis wasn't so common. And then KAITO, you know, just tapping everything down, replacing itself with Surveil as well. So it lets you look at like 2 cards, possibly 3 by drawing a card and surveilling 2 things away. And then Curiosity. I don't think that you need to ban 2 things from Dimir, but I do think they need to at least touch 1 thing from Dimir. As a Dimir enjoyer myself, it hurts to say because it is so fair. But it's very tilting. And for those reasons alone, they probably have to do something. If I were on the balance team, these would be my arguments for why we want to move some of this stuff out of the way, because we want things to change a little bit. We want to keep it fresh. We don't want to worry about, you know, hard investment in some decks. Dimir is not completely unplayable without KAITO. Again, you just fully sideboard KAITO out in some matchups. And KAITO isn't like the linchpin, you know, thing that makes tempo viable. So when you look at blue, though, things that play blue definitely like playing Curiosity. And if they're more of a creature-based game plan, they don't really care about other like cards that draw them cards. They want to play Curiosity over a lot of things. So I think Curiosity kind of carries more of the blue decks than KAITO does. And for that reason, I would say that Curiosity can stay, because, you know, just 1 to 2 Curiosities and like Simic aggro, it really kind of validates it when it's getting blown out every single turn, especially because people will hold all their removal to make sure Ouroborid doesn't take over the game. All right, so now that leads me to my next kind of like bannable card, because we have like 2 more on this list, and that is mono green Ouroborid. So Ouroborid is not mono green. Obviously, you play it in Simic, you play it in Gruul, you play it in Golgari, you play it in mono green. And this is another tilting card. I would say that it is very fair, just because, again, it's on curve with a 4-drop. But the amount of power, the amount of scaling that it has is so crazy exponential that if you allow Ouroborid to live for 1 turn, the game is just over. If your plan is to board wipe them, cool, you survive for now. But, you know, in the situations where you don't have a board wipe and they get any turns with Ouroborid, as someone who's played with Ouroborid a bunch, it definitely flips the game on its head, and they just kind of win with more than 1 turn. So 1 turn, you have 1 turn to board wipe them. If they get more than that, the game's over. You should probably pack it up. If you have a way to kill the Ouroborid, then cool. There's a lot of 3 damage things in red that can deal with this. So this is not like a game ender. You have lightning strikes, you have torch tower, lightning helix. So a lot of things to deal with this. White has a lot of removal spells. Black has a lot of removal spells. There's a lot of board wipes in both of those as well. You can counter the Ouroborid in blue. You can, with green, you're kind of like racing. So when green goes against that, you're kind of like whoever has it, has it. But yeah, I would say this is very low on the bannable scale. Again, it's a 4-drop. So we kind of expect things that are 4-drops to kind of inch you to winning the game. This doesn't just win the game on turn 4. This is kind of like a turn 5, 6 win con. And also, you could have had your entire board disrupted up until playing the Ouroborid. So if it does come down on turn 4 and you have no board, then this is not really doing anything until like a while, you know? So an Ouroborid all by itself is not the threat that you might think it is. So if you really have like some hardcore reasons why Ouroboros should be banned, I'd love to hear them. I'd also love to hear any thoughts on any of the other cards I've talked about here. Obviously, these are very polarizing takes with people saying a card should or should not be banned. I would put Ouroborid kind of lower on that scale. But here's the situation where I think like Ouroborid could take over the meta. It could very well be that they kind of nerf Dimir midrange and mono red so much that we end up having this kind of like coin flip meta of like Ouroborid decks versus control decks. So I don't want that either. I feel like if we remove too much from the like more aggro style decks, I feel like there's so many decks as well that just aren't being able to be played right now. Like say like Mardu Mobilize or Sacrifice, or just think of any pet deck that you have right now that isn't Izzet Cauldron, and it is just losing to Izzet Cauldron. So it's super hard to say like, oh, this also Ouroborid needs to go because everybody's playing that. Ouroborid's just the one that's like, it's one of those decks that's super playable against Izzet Cauldron when Cauldron isn't ending the game within like turn 3-4. Like Ouroborid can actually like just grow out of control for them. So it is one of the more playable decks right now in the Cauldron meta. So, you know, it's hard to say like that this card is like so out of control broken when it's just one of the decks that can stand against it, you know, but we haven't seen it win a single tournament. It is very rare that it even places super high in MTGO challenges. So, you know, I just really love playing it. I think it's a really good, solid deck. It does place very high in challenges and tournaments. So it's not like completely taking over the meta when left unchecked, because, you know, again, you know, we have the conventional style removal that will be back in the meta and on the menu once Izzet Cauldron is kind of like taking out the back. You know, and who knows, they might also hit Cauldron, so we don't even know about that. So that's still on the menu as well. They might hit Izzet VV and the Cauldron, you know, take out VV and Cauldron all at once. But yeah, so I don't really think Ouroborid is, you know, bannable, but if there was anything in green, that would be the one to touch, and it would make me really sad. Although on MTGA, I would be happy because then I'd have a lot of mythics back if they ban all this stuff overnight. Banning a ton of mythics like this would be crazy, but we would still get them all back. Although for paper, I think if they ban too many mythics like this, it would be very tilting for a lot of people and they might stop playing the game altogether, because a playset of Ouroborid costs about $100 right now and it's like $25 in paper, give or take. It'd be like banning Quantum Riddler in Modern or something like that, which would be crazy. It wouldn't happen though. You know, they actually, you know, they shadow care about the secondary market. So I don't think those things would happen. But yeah, okay. So talked about Ouroborid, we talked about Dimir midrange, talked about mono red. Now, last thing on the menu, which I think everybody kind of agrees about, is the Kona Omniscience decks, and nobody likes playing against them. But you know, right now Omniscience doesn't really have like a super good win con, so they just kind of dirtle around and play like a bunch of meringues until, like, you know, they can't really mill you out so much. Although I think if they really wanted to kill you, they could play that the Black Dragonstorm card, which would bounce back to their hand, and then play meringue over and over with that card, and then just kind of like drain you out. But that would probably be like a Sultai build, I guess. But right now they kind of want to play like Bant or Simic Kona to put Omniscience into play. But yeah, this is definitely another like super tilting card. Definitely more tilting than every other card that's been named so far, other than, you know, Vivi. Yeah, nobody likes playing against Omniscience, digitally or in paper, because you're just kind of sitting there while they dirtle for like 10 minutes. And this is just like a super, super tilting and uninviting playstyle. It's like, if it's ever good, you know, people like will be kind of like gatekept by it because they won't be willing to learn this deck. They'll play against it a few times. They'll get super mad about it. You know, I know a lot of people who don't like playing those types of decks, who just, you know, because it's so tilting to play against, they don't even want to touch it themselves because they don't want to be that person. Then there's the other side of that coin, which is like, you genuinely like playing combo decks. This is perfect for you. You might even in modern play like Amulet Titan, and that's kind of like more your play style. So this is really good for that style of player. So therefore, this is why they have Omniscience in the format in the first place. They wanted to make one of these more like kind of like Giga Brain style Omniscience decks, although I don't think Omniscience is very Giga Brain, since, you know, you kind of either have a bunch of draw spells in hand or you don't once you get it in play. And Simic Omniscience can put Kona into play and tap it on turn 3 with the right build, if you have like a Lana Ward to put it in play on turn 3. So, you know, that's a very high roll situation for it to get Omniscience in play on 3 and then win. But, you know, definitely can happen. It's usually turn 4. You definitely have a lot of like Kona decks that are playing like Celestia as well, or they're playing like Abzan sometimes, and they're just playing like a Una deck with Kona, so they can put some type of like crazy like Bahamut in play or something like that, and they're not really trying to win with Omniscience. Or they're still playing Omniscience, and then they're going to play all that stuff out anyways. Either way, very tilting. Still, I don't think it's bannable, just because I don't think they would. I think they really like want this to be part of the meta. And this is not me saying that it's not bannable, because I personally hate playing against it. Hence why I don't really recommend these decks too often, since I know that it's really tilting and people know the deck. They don't, if they're going to play the deck, you're already going to know. So it's not something that's like, you know, a hidden tech. But yeah, so that deck is really, really like tilting to play against. Therefore, I'm my personal opinion, I think Omniscience to go, you know, just to kind of promote more positive play patterns just in general. It's like, if we're going to move other stuff out of the way, you might as well keep the meta a little bit more open. But again, like with all these different ideas for the bans, it's like, they're probably just going to ban Vivi and nothing else. And they're going to see how it develops. And then, you know, if that's going to be their case of like seeing how it develops, I really hope they announce another ban window very, very soon. Just kind of rehashing, we talked about all our types here. We talked about mono red, Nemesis, Demir, mid-range. Definitely, I think Profs is going. Out of every card we've talked about today, I am like 75 to 80% sure that Profs is going to go as well, just because a lot of people have played the deck without Vivi and just played the Prof shell. And I've definitely played it in a bunch of other shells as well. It's like Jeskai, Grixis, anything with blue. You know, you can play with Monument, you can play without Monument, you can play with Oculus. You know, there's so many different shells for Profs that I think they might want to just take it out just to diversify the meta a bunch and make sure it doesn't just come down to a bunch of Profs piles and eventually the best one presents itself, which might just be Izzet again. So in an effort to make sure that Izzet doesn't just rise to the top again, I think Profs has to go. But other than that, I think the meta it might be okay. I don't know. I think that when you're removing like a very specific 2 cards out of like, is it? And then all of a sudden you're worried about like 8 different decks. You might be worried about a balanced meta, and you might just be afraid that everything is just generally too strong. And I think that's more where we're at with Standard, less about just mass banning a bunch of things again, even though it might be correct to like hit Dimir mid range as well. Yeah, I don't really think that the meta is so much needing like a ton of bans as it is needing a design overhaul. I think that everything is just in general is way too strong, and that they need to kind of like pull back their designs a little bit, because, you know, not only are they designing for Commander right now, they're designing for, you know, kind of fire design in this like kind of roundabout way, and they're not telling us about it anymore. Anyways, wanted to talk about all the bans today, and what could possibly be banned in the future, and what happened over the weekend with the Baltimore SCG. Anyways, I'll be talking to you guys soon on, we got another top few decks of the week on Friday, and some more Pioneer content that I've been working up as well. It's going to be coming out pretty soon as well. And then make sure to check out the Power Cube draft. That one's been pretty fun. I might not make any content on it, but it is ranked. It is ranked. Attention. We have a ranked cube on MTGA right now. A little bit more expensive, but it is ranked. So mark that one off. Might be worth playing if you really love drafting and you want to play with some powerful stuff and you want to play in a ranked environment. This cube might be perfect for you. Personally, I hate strip mine. I just got strip mine 2 games in a row to end my first draft, which didn't feel pretty good. So taking a little break. Anyways, see you guys later. See you soon.